I am a member of the Women's Empowerment Team at the YWCA of Asheville. Thank you everyone for joining us today for the Week Without Violence virtual tour of local providers. Nationally, the YWCA has the largest network of domestic and sexual violence service providers. Here in Asheville and Buncombe County, this work is spearheaded by a number of wonderful organizations that are supporting survivors of violence. Our goal today is to introduce you to these organizations and give them an opportunity to discuss their work in our community. We do want to honor our 1 hour time commitment. So at the end of our tour, we may have a little time for a question or two, but if we don't, feel free to send any questions you have my way, and I will point you in the right direction in finding resources in our community. Before we dive in, I want to share some facts with you that support why we believe that everyone deserves to be safe and free from violence, abuse, and threats. Violence continues to impact the lives of women and women of color in particular, and their families across the United States. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence, and on average, more than 3 women are murdered by their current or former partners in the United States every day. Black women experience intimate partner violence at a rate 19% higher than that of white women. 21 to 55% of Asian and Pacific Islander women report experiencing intimate physical and/or sexual violence during their lifetimes. Approximately 1 in 3 Hispanic Latinx women have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime, and 1 in 12 of Hispanic Latina women experienced this violence in the previous 12 months. I'm now going to introduce you to Kala. Kala is a recent graduate of our YWCA Getting Ahead program. Our Getting Ahead program empowers women of all ages and backgrounds to make financial choices that positively impact themselves, their families, and their communities. Kala is a woman with a tremendous personal story. As an advocate and survivor, she'll be sharing with us why the work to eliminate violence in our communities is so important to her. Kala, welcome to our panel. We're so glad you could join us.
Thank you for the introduction, Jenny. I'm so excited and grateful for the opportunity to be with all of you today. After my family experienced violence, I sought out support from Homeward Bound, Our Voice, All Souls Counseling, Mission Children's Hospital, and the Department of Social Services, as well as Women's Song Choir. Through those organizations, I found support, but I believe there is more work to be done to support survivors of violence. Today, as we begin this panel to explore services in our community, I want to share a poem I wrote with you. It expresses my hope for the future and my hope for my girls. Peace, love, and no humiliation. The victim of a life of crimes was my situation. I decided to awake from the chaos and frustration, to bring a better day that I put faith in, to teach my youth that the only way for their generation is through the practice of love and meditation. Give the babies a planet to feel safe in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kala. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your beautiful poem with everyone. I am going to move into an introduction of each organization. And those introductions will begin with some statistical information, and then I'm going to allow everyone to share the services that each organization in our community provides that's represented here. Gender-based violence continues to be a pervasive problem in the United States with far-reaching consequences. Statistics show that every 90 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. Felicia and Aria are here from Our Voice, which is an organization that supports survivors of rape, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Welcome. Could you tell us a little bit about the support services you provide in our region? Oh, good. Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Araya Ratanaprak.
Okay.
I'm the client navigator, Our Voice. So the services we provide are to survivors and primary survivors and their secondary survivors, so loved ones who are impacted by sexual violence residing in Buncombe County. So we offer medical advocacy for those who have recently experienced sexual assault and are seeking medical care. We also provide court and legal advocacy for those who want to engage with the legal system. We also offer case management for people who whose lives have been uprooted due to the sexual violence, the most recent sexual violence. And we also have a 24-hour crisis hotline as well as short-term counseling. I don't know if Felicia was able to log on, so
Okay.
I'm not sure. I mean, we can also offer some information in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, how would you go about,
Yes. Okay.
You know what I mean. Then.
I know what you mean. Yeah, so because, sexual violence is foundational to how systems of oppression work in the United States. We do recognize that accessibility is important, and statistics have shown that marginally housed women, Latinx, Latino women who are immigrants, women under 20, and trans and queer women of color are most impacted by sexual violence in this country. So in order to make our services more accessible, we do not require any identification from anyone. We have Spanish-speaking staff. We also have a language interpretation service available. It is a phone service, so it is not in person. And we also, we do medical evaluations and evidence collection performed by sexual assault nurse examiners at the Family Justice Center, which is free of cost. Because if one were to go to the hospital, they will accrue cost there. We also can meet with survivors at an alternate location if they have privacy concerns or mobility concerns. We also do not share anyone's information with outside agencies unless they request that. We also have Black, Latinx, Asian American, and LGBTQIA staff on call. So if someone feels more comfortable seeking services with someone that has an identity aligning with their own, that is an option. But yeah, that's basically how we do try to keep our services accessible.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And we're going to learn more about the services offered at the Family Justice Center as we go along. Victims of domestic violence lose about 8 million days of paid work per year because of the violence they experienced. We also know that 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence within their lifetime, within her lifetime, and more than 3 women are murdered by their partners each day. Helpmate is our local organization that works with victims and survivors of intimate partner violence. Christy, could you tell us more about Helpmate and how it serves our community?
Sure. Thanks again for having Helpmate on and putting all of this together. Helpmate, a lot of people still don't know about Helpmate, even though we've been in the community for a long time, but Helpmate provides a lot of different support services to survivors of intimate partner violence, and we've been providing services for over 40 years in Buncombe County. So we have a lot of different free and confidential services, and anybody who identifies as a survivor, can access our services. So it doesn't matter about gender identity or sexual orientation or, any other, identities. So anybody who identifies as a survivor can work with us. We do have a 24-hour hotline. That's a great way to access all of our services. People can connect to our hotline in a lot of different ways. You can find it on our website, which is helpmateonline.org. You can call 211. United Way's 211, which is a really easy number to remember, and get connected to Helpmate's hotline that way. But it's 254-0516 is our number. That number's for anybody who just needs information about Helpmate, about the issue of intimate partner abuse. So we get calls not only from survivors, but also from outer support people, friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, professionals, anybody who might want to support somebody in their life who's struggling with an abusive relationship. So that's a great kind of portal to all of our services, but we do offer individual clinical counseling as well. These days, we're still offering that primarily through virtual means or phone counseling sessions, but that's still definitely happening even during COVID. Our support groups, we normally have a weekly support group for English-speaking survivors and Spanish-speaking survivors, and we normally have a domestic violence education class that's happening every week, but those groups and classes are not happening at this moment. Hopefully we'll be able to start those up again when things get better, but we're not currently able to offer the groups. But we do still have our court advocacy program. We have court advocates that work out of the Buncombe County Courthouse on the second floor, and they're there to help people navigate the court system, because it's, particularly for survivors, it's a really scary process to go and file for a domestic violence protective order or press criminal charges. And they're facing all sorts of situations, and it's stressful, and they're juggling a lot of different things. So our court advocates are really there to provide a lot of information and emotional support and go with them to court if they need that. So if somebody just needs information about a domestic violence protective order or pressing criminal charges or finding an attorney that is educated about domestic violence, that might even take the case pro bono for free or on a sliding scale basis, our court advocates can help with all of those things. We also do have a temporary emergency shelter, and we had to close down our regular shelter back in March, early April, but we've been operating out of a hotel since mid-April. And that's been really great so that we can continue to offer that. So our shelter is specifically for folks who are fleeing really dangerous, abusive relationships. And so if somebody needs information about shelter or wants to come into our shelter, they can call our hotline. We also do operate out of the Family Justice Center. And we have staff there, from Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We've always, even since the beginning of COVID, tried to make sure that we had some staff there to do intakes and case management and, offer a lot of safety planning. So if somebody can't make a phone call or wants to talk in person, they can, come to the Family Justice Center, which is open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And we do take walk-in clients as well. The other thing I want to mention is that we do a lot of child and family advocacy as well. So supporting parents who are trying to support their children and who've all experienced a lot of different traumatic situations, and trying to make sure the kids are getting counseling and making sure that the parents are getting all the support that they need. So that's another service we provide. And then finally, we do offer a lot of community education and professional training. And these days we've had to adapt to doing a lot of virtual workshops and presentations, but we're still offering that. And I'd also want to just stress that the way that HelpMate operates is really focused on an empowerment approach. So we really feel like survivors are the experts in their own situations, and we don't tell them what to do, and we're not going to tell them they have to leave their partner or that they have to get a protective order or they have to do anything. We want to help them regain their power and control. So we're here to explore options, to help them determine what options are available to them, help them get connected to resources, help advocate for them in every way we can. But ultimately, it is the survivor's decision at the end of the day, what they want to do and what they don't want to do. So we feel like that's a much more effective way for survivors to feel like they're in control of their own situation and, can keep themselves safe and keep their children safe. Because we know, and a lot of you know, that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they're trying to leave an abusive relationship or after they've left. So we want to make sure they have a lot of safety planning options and access to resources, and just know what the consequences are going to be if they, leave quickly without a plan, and make sure that they're well-informed and supported throughout that process. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. Yeah, I know a lot of the women that I work with through Getting Ahead have found the shelter and a real comfort in their life and a real place where they did find empowerment, and a lot of the women to know the number really well, the helpmate number. Thank you so much for your introduction to the services. And 1 second. So another organization we're going to explore that is housed in the same place as Helpmate and Our Voice is the Mountain Child Advocacy Center. But a common myth that is held in our country is that child sexual abuse is perpetrated by strangers and pedophiles. But most people who sexually abuse children are friends, partners, family members, and community members. About 90% of children who are victims of sexual abuse know their abuser. Less than 10% of sexually abused children are abused by a stranger. Mountain Child Advocacy Center works with children who have experienced abuse and neglect. Colleen, I'm so happy to have you here. Could you tell us a little bit about Mountain Child Advocacy Center?
Hi, my name is Colleen Burnett. I work for the Mountain Child Advocacy Center as a community educator. And we work closely with the other agencies that are part of the Family Justice Center, but the main offices for the Mountain Child Advocacy Center are located at Mission Children's Hospital down on the bottom floor. Child advocacy centers exist across the country. It's a model that was developed by the National Children's Alliance. The statistics that you share, Jenny, are really significant. When I provide trainings in our community, I share that 1 in 10 children will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday, and that's just sexual abuse. So it's really a lot of work we have to do to support children and families in prevention education and support them when the act of abuse does happen. And that is all of the work of the Mountain Child Advocacy Center that I'm proud to be a part of and involved in that work. So I shared a video link with Jenny that our director, Jeff Sidoli, shares a little bit more about the important work of the Mountain Child Advocacy Center.
So the Mountain Child Advocacy Center will main purpose, as it says, is working with the children that will be coming into the Family Justice Center. Those kids will present with multiple needs and multiple issues, and so our job is to try to evaluate those, provide services that we have, or if we don't have them, then we're going to look to make referrals and access those services in the community, depending on what the needs are. So whether it's mental health, medical, it might be basic needs, it might be housing. Those are things that we're going to be evaluating, doing a needs assessment with the family, making sure that those things are being thought out and trying to provide those services, again, whether internally through us or externally through other agencies and resources that we work with in the community. So our main role is going to be, as the child comes in, if there are any issues related to neglect and abuse, whether it's through the domestic violence or through some other experience that the child and the family have, we're going to be working with them to make sure that those needs are, again, accurately assessed and services are provided for them. So some people might ask, what is a Child Advocacy Center? The Child Advocacy Center is a supportive, child-friendly environment that promotes safety by a team of specially trained professionals who evaluate and investigate cases of child abuse to help children and their families overcome these difficult experiences. So when you come to the Child Advocacy Center, you're going to be dealing with different folks from different disciplines. You're going to have medical providers. They're going to do a medical exam with your child to make sure there's any physical, any medical concerns that we might have with them. The child may be interviewed in what we call a forensic interview. So they're going to meet interviewers that are specially trained to deal with children who interview them around these difficult subjects. There's also going to be counselors available. Those counselors are going to be assessing and treating the various needs that the children might present when they come in. There are family advocates. The family advocates, they're specialists who kind of work with the family to kind of navigate them through the system as they go through. We also have prevention and education specialists who will work in the community and work with non-offending parents. You may run into social workers that are here working with us from Department of Social Services. You may also run into police officers from law enforcement who are also helping us on various cases that are going on with the children that we meet with. So the forensic interviews and medical services, what does that look like? The medical services are they're not only doing assessment, but they're consulting from the medical professionals to talk about the experiences that the child has had. They'll talk about the interviews and they'll deal with both the child and the caretaker because they want to get a good global perspective of what's going on with the child. The forensic interview, it's so that these experiences that the children have been through, that they don't have to talk to multiple peoples and tell their story over and over again. It's a single sensitive interview by a specialized trainer that has worked with children and has specialized training in interviewing around these subjects with children. The mental health services, so the children that come in are going to be seen by specially trained therapists. They've been through specific training around trauma and how to not only assess it, but to treat it. And so they're going to provide these specialty services to work with the kids to help reduce the effects and impacts from these experiences. Often trauma can come later on, not just from the experiences, but from the system. So they're going to work with the families and work with the children to try to reduce those symptoms so they can better navigate and overcome the experiences that they've had. And the CAC is a trauma-informed environment, so we kind of set it up so that when kids come in, it's friendly to them, they feel safe, it promotes support to them, that they know that they can come into this environment and be supported, and that they're going to be protected as they kind of make this journey through these experiences. The family advocate is often the person that's going to be the first person that the family meets and often the last person they work with. They kind of help navigate the family through the system. Often the system can be not only overwhelming, but pretty scary. So they're really helping them be the liaison between the medical, between the mental health, law enforcement, the district attorney's office. They're going to help not only access services, but help them communicate and navigate those services depending what the needs are with those different specific issues related to that family. We also provide community education and prevention. Most of that comes through the schools. We work in the elementary schools, K through 5, doing prevention with children. But we also work with those parents and the caregivers of those children to make sure they have the knowledge and understand how best to protect their children in the community. We also work with adult professionals in the community, anything from Head Start, daycare programs, to other professionals that want to be educated about what to look for, what are red flags, what to report on, and who do they go for help and support and services. We also provide what's called triple P parenting. It's for non-offending parents, and it's a parent support, either individual or through group process. But we'll work with families to help them manage and deal with these situations, whether they're related to mental health, high-risk behaviors, or again, identifying potential abuse or neglect with the child. The other thing that the Mountain Child Advocacy Center facilitates is what's called the Multi-Disciplinary Team. It's a coordinated interagency team that works to help understand what's happened to the child and then also to try to guide actions that result from these events happening. So it may be law enforcement with their investigation. It may be talking and working with the district attorney on prosecuting the case. It may be medical providers, making sure that we get the right services for the child. Or it might be mental health, where we're trying to get the right referral and making sure those needs are met. And of course, advocacy to work with the family. So the team meets multiple times a month to review all child sexual abuse cases. And in that process, we review all the information, make sure that nothing's being missed, that we're making sure that the child and the family's needs are getting met, and that we as a system are working efficiently and learning from the different disciplines how to best meet those needs. So if you have any other questions about the Mountain Child Advocacy Center, there's a couple things you can do. You can visit our website, which is mtncac.org. You can also contact us at 213-9824 if you have any further questions about services or things that we can provide, or even just questions that we can answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Colleen, for sharing that video. It's super informative. Have your services changed at all in this COVID-19 era?
They have changed. Most of the therapy modalities are happening virtually. There's a few of the therapists that work with some of the youngest children that are meeting in the center, but primarily we're trying to do everything virtual. But there are, I do parenting education through Zoom, and all the therapy modalities, most of them are happening through Zoom. So the medical exams are still happening in person. The whole medical team is still there at the Children's Hospital. So that is happening. And we, since March, the numbers have slowed down of reports of abuse, but we know that's not because there are fewer numbers of abuse. It's because children have not been in school, and educators are one of the biggest reporters of child abuse. So that's a concern, and the cases coming in are in fact like more serious cases. So those are some of the changes in what we see happening right now.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Diana to talk about the FJC and that model.
Great, thank you. I'm just honored to be here with this awesome group of folks talking about the important work that each organization does. I just kind of want to step back and talk a little bit about the Family Justice Center model, why we exist, and our relevance to the community, to Buncombe County. So want to step back in time to 2013, where Buncombe County tied with Wake County, a county significantly larger than ours, for having the second highest number of domestic violence related homicides. So that's not a top 10 list that any community wants to be on. And it was very eye-opening for us as a community, fast forward in 2014, looking back at last year's data, at the fact that, we had 18 homicides in our community that year, and 16 of them were somehow related to intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So that, again, that was an eye-opening piece of data for us as a community, and it allowed us as a community to galvanize our county leadership, our city leadership, our victim advocates, many of which are on this call, our law enforcement partners, and a variety of stakeholders that somehow work in response to domestic violence and sexual violence. And a lot of things came out of this 2-year planning period in trying to resolve this one primary issue. The original primary problem we were trying to solve as a community is, how do we reduce domestic violence homicides? And from that, we gained a lot of more information around the impact on children and the correlation with and intersectionality with sexual violence. And so our task and our mission kind of grew. But one of the things that we found in doing a community survey and a community mapping was that at the time, prior to the Family Justice Center opening, our community was very, fairly resource rich. When you compare us to some of our neighboring, more rural counties, we have a lot going on for us as a community in terms of services and progressive approaches and whatnot. But all of the organizations that were serving survivors at the time were all over town. And what we found was that even though all the organizations were doing incredible work and were supporting survivors in seeking safety and healing, the process was still fairly complicated, especially if you had a survivor that was wanting to access more than one agency or more than one resource for themselves or their family. So one of the things that we found was prior to the Family Justice Center, within the first 3 days after a victimization, a survivor was having to fill out 61 different forms. They were having to travel 8 different times. They were having to make at least 5 different phone calls. They were having to talk to and reshare their victimization story to 21 different people. They received 30 referrals on average, and many times those individuals never got the help that they were looking for. And so something that came from that information was looking at best practice models across the country for streamlining that process for survivors. And what emerged was the Family Justice Center, which is a model that was created by the Alliance for Hope, which is based out of San Diego. There are over 300 family justice centers currently in the country and several internationally. But essentially what makes this model the model that it is it co-locates all of the organizations that are serving survivors, and it allows them to work under one roof and in a more streamlined, coordinated fashion. So when we talk about the Family Justice Center, we're really not talking about one organization. We're talking about 12 that have chosen to co-locate together. We've been open since July 2016. So just a little under 4.5 years. We have 12 different on-site partners, some of which have already spoken and shared about their services. Some of the services that are not represented on this call that I wanted to highlight is the YW. They provide free on-site childcare for survivors who might be coming in to access services. That is in place. We've changed how that looks during COVID. We're serving one family at a time so that there's less interaction between families that are not in the same immediate household, and we've increased our cleaning schedule and our process in terms of sanitizing the toys and whatnot. But I'm proud to say that the YW has partnered with us in providing that free on-site childcare. Mission Hospital, that was referenced by Our Voice, they have a free forensic clinic to serve survivors, to gather evidence, to do sexual assault kits, and to provide consult, medications, morning after medication, STI prevention. If someone doesn't know what's involved in that process, they can meet with a nurse, no questions asked, and just start the conversation and make an informed, empowered choice about how they want to proceed moving forward. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight Pisgah Legal Services. They have an on-site staff attorney, and they also have an intake paralegal that helps with screening and client access of services. But again, if a survivor is looking for support in filing for custody of their children, wanting to seek a protective order or a 50B, or just wants to kind of start any sort of legal process, they can start that process with Pisgah Legal and go from there. The last thing I want to highlight about the Family Justice Center model itself is our integrated intake process. So when I spoke earlier, I said that a survivor was having to fill out all these forms and share their story over and over again. And so part of the model is that when a survivor first comes in to access services, they can meet with an intake specialist. And these are staff that are contracted staff through Helpmate, who are trained in domestic violence and sexual violence, elder abuse, and child abuse, so that they can have the survivor share their story, and with permission, they can connect them with whatever resources that survivor wants to access. And so we have these little dens that are made to feel a little more warm and welcoming than a standard office setting, even though it is, an office setting, where, if a client wants to, or a survivor wants to access one service, great. But if they want to access 8, those services can come to them, and they don't have to navigate around town the way they used to before we had a Family Justice Center. We have confidentiality agreements where the survivor, has to give written permission for the information to be shared. But again, if with permission, that survivor can access services from Helpmate, Our Voice, Mountain Child Advocacy Center, make a police report if they'd like to. So that's kind of a unique part of the process. And just before I wrap up, I'd like to highlight during COVID, again, we've always remained open. Our doors, we know that domestic violence is going up. We, as Colleen said, we know child abuse is continuing to happen, even though the reports are down. And so we've ramped up our cleaning processes. We do screening questions when people enter the building. We provide face masks. All staff are wearing face masks. We also have retrofitted all of the dens to have web cameras so that if a survivor wants to come in, but they still don't feel comfortable sitting face to face with a person, they can do it just the way we're doing it here, virtually with the intake specialist in the room right next door. And we are trying to maintain a 50% staffing capacity on site so there's not too many people crammed into the space. So the health and safety of folks seeking services is very important to us. I just kind of wanted to highlight that. So that's a little bit about the Family Justice Center and our model and kind of how we've pivoted during COVID. Oh, I do want to share, I'm sorry, two last things when we talk about equity and access. Two things that not a lot of people know. We have a no arrest policy. We do have uniformed law enforcement on site. We have a no arrest policy that they have agreed to so that if a survivor comes in with a pending warrant for something else, a drug offense, unpaid motor vehicle related thing, they will not be arrested. They will be notified by law enforcement if it even comes up on their radar, and they'll be told how to get that issue resolved. We never want a survivor to not seek services because they're worried about being arrested. And then we never ask about immigration status. So I want to recognize that the Family Justice Center is in a Buncombe County building. We provide the space free of charge to all of the on-site partners. We picked our location because it's right across the street from the courthouse. And so there is some concern about walking into a building with uniformed law enforcement and those concerns. And so I like to highlight those 2 points. And I think we have more work to do in that area, but I think at least having that information is a start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. And it's great your background is the Family Justice Center. So that's just that is where you enter into the building and can access all the services there. Thank you for that, like very complete introduction to what is available at the Family Justice Center, and your COVID practices and why it exists all together as well. Thanks so much. And we have one more stop on our virtual tour, and that is with that's with Youth Outright. So sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and sexual harassment can happen to anyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Women of all sexual identities bear the disproportionate burden of gender-based violence, but we must also recognize the diverse experiences of survivors who represent any and all genders, gender identities, and sexual orientations. Youth Outright is the only youth advocacy and leadership nonprofit organization in the region solely dedicated to empowering LGBTQIA+ youth ages 11 to 20 in Western North Carolina. Adrian and Chelsea, thank you for being here, and tell us about the work that y'all are doing currently to support our youth and how violence impacts the youth that you serve.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jenny, and thank you everyone else for being here and talking about your organizations today. It's been really incredible to hear about all the different things y'all are doing. My name is Chelsea Novak. I use she, her pronouns. I am an 18-year-old trans woman from Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm also a peer facilitator at Youth Outright. we move to educate and combat gender-based violence through our two weekly social groups that happen every Wednesday and Sunday virtually. Wednesday from 6 to 8 and Sunday from 3:30 to 5:30, where we will have programming specifically dedicated to educating our young audience about consent and healthy relationships, specifically about the different varieties of consent and its many different factors, how it has to be freely given, reversible and formed, enthusiastic and soberly given. And we will also educate our young people about healthy relationships and how to tell the difference between a healthy, toxic, and abusive relationship, as well as giving them the skills to navigate these things if they find themselves in these situations.
Thank you, Chelsea. Yeah, that's a big part of what we do in our weekly programs. And another piece that we do in addition to direct education around consent and relationships and gender and sexuality is we do some basic community building and resiliency skill development. We recognize those things are protective factors against a variety of types of violence, right? And we recognize that providing young people with the skills to create their own support plans or safety plans could prevent further harm in the event that they do encounter some form of harm. So we work a lot in the prevention space. We've had some opportunities to collaborate with some of the organizations in the room. Pre-COVID, when we were allowed to do stuff in person, I got to go with Helpmate to visit a couple high school health classes and talk about healthy relationships and that kind of stuff. And for me, that was an amazing opportunity to work with young people who were across the gender and sexuality spectrum, right? Primarily, we work with LGBTQ folks, but to be able to work in a mixed gender and sexuality space allows us to support all of the young people in understanding gender and sexuality and consent and violence in that lens as well. We're also the statewide GSA affiliate group for North Carolina. So GSA stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance. Those are clubs that are in the high schools, middle schools, and a few colleges as well. And those are LGBT student groups. And one thing that we have seen through studies, Journal of Adolescent Health did one, just the existence of a GSA actually reduces violence, sexual as well as just bullying and self-harm. And there's lots of positive spillover from having a GSA at a club or a GSA at a school. So right now we know about, I'm estimating, 35 GSA clubs that are in Western North Carolina, statewide somewhere between 60 and 70. And so we support those clubs through virtual site visits. We do some mentorship and leadership development for those young people. And if a young person ever comes to us in crisis or having suffered from violence, we do resource mapping, right? So we don't do a lot of case management directly, but we connect young people to a lot of the folks in the room, right? And we work with folks who serve youth to better serve trans and queer young people through cultural competency trainings and things like that. And then I think Chelsea was going to share with us a little bit about how violence affects our young people specifically.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much, Adrian. Violence, especially sexual violence, particularly impacts trans people through the use of the law, the Gay Trans Panic Defense, which is a law that in, I believe, 31 different states is legal and only 19 states protect against. The law essentially justifies the murder of a LGBTQ plus person solely based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And in 2015, a US transgender survey found that 47% of transgender people are sexually assaulted at some point in their life. Nearly half, which is roughly 48% of bisexual women who are rape survivors experienced their first rape between the ages of 11 and 17. Trans and non-binary students in grades K through 12 also report significant rates of harassment, physical assault, and sexual violence. 80% of transgender students report feeling unsafe at their schools because of their gender identity. 12% of those transgender youth report being sexually assaulted in those K through 12 settings by peers or educational staff. This does not include family members or relatives. 24% of American Indian transgender students, 18% of multiracial transgender students, and 17% of Asian transgender students, and 15% of Black transgender students also experience high amounts of sexual assault. And Adrian, if you would go ahead and share that infographic now, that would be awesome.
Can you all see that?
Yes. Yeah, we can see it, Adrian.
Oh, I was trying to find my dang mute button. Sorry, Fred. It had moved all the way up to the top of the screen. But this is a resource that we wanted to share with you all that really highlights violence for the trans and non-binary community specifically. We know that, you know, I think Chelsea named a couple of these things here, but almost 50% of trans folks are experiencing sexual violence. And there are some racial breakdowns here too. And as well as for young people, right? 78% of young people are experiencing harassment at school from their peers or even educators sometimes. And so I'll drop this resource in the chat too, but I think it's really important to uplift and highlight that when folks are at multiple intersections of marginalized identities, their risk for violence just increases exponentially, right? And so you'll see that these also coincide with violence against self, right? Past suicide attempts also are correlated with these things. And so again, I'll drop this in the chat so folks can explore that more. This is something from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And they've done a lot of really great research and data work there. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that, Chelsea?
No, I think I said it all.
And then, yeah, I think that's what we got, friends. I dropped our link tree in the chat. That links to our website, our GSA registry campaign that's going on right now. I did see a question in the chat from Libby around advocating against some of these policies and laws, specifically the trans panic defense. That is something that our young people are working on a strategy right now around, actually. I can uplift those action steps out to the community when those are ready. I will say that, you know, North Carolina does not have protections for trans folks right now. And there's only 19 states that do protect against the trans panic defense. You know, I think first steps, right, are really having conversations within the parent community around why it's important to protect trans young people, right? I think for a lot of parents who haven't had a lot of experience having conversations around gender or sexuality, there's just a lack of education, and they don't understand the risks that our young people are facing. And if we have compassionate educational conversations with them, I think these issues like trans panic defense come to their attention. Right now, I think a lot of cis and heterosexual people don't recognize that the trans panic defense is a thing. And so just having these conversations, I think, is a great way for cisgender, meaning not trans, cisgender allies can have those conversations in their communities and get involved with their, you know, if you're a parent, get involved with school groups and the PTA or PFLAG. PFLAG is an organization, there's 2 chapters, one in Asheville, one in Hendersonville, and they do specific support around parents and families of lesbian and gay and transgender people. And those are great spaces to find some peer support and also organize as advocates for our young people. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Adrian and Chelsea. We really appreciate your the resources and the information that you brought, as well as what you're doing in the community with our young people. And you've already led us into our final question, which is we know that gender-based violence is prevalent in our community and across the country, even as prevalent as police officers killing Breonna Taylor while she was in her home. This issue is pressing, yet some people may feel removed from any action. How do you see gender-based violence impacting our community in Asheville and Buncombe County? And how would you encourage our community members to advocate for a world without violence? And that question is open to anyone on the panel. So we have 7 more minutes, so feel free to jump in and unmute yourself and share.
I'll jump in briefly. I think it's a very complicated issue, and I think something that's been brought to my attention, and I've been part of the reimagining policing conversation that the city of Asheville has been a part of, in partnership with the Asheville Police Department, and have been a part of, I think, some meaningful conversation about what our future could look like as a community. Something that I have found a little interesting in some of the community conversations around it has been around not viewing intimate partner violence and sexual violence as something that we might want to consider keeping some sort of law enforcement response. Whether it's reimagining that to have it be what we call a dual response, where maybe it's law enforcement with an advocate, some sort of partnership with the victim advocacy organizations. But when we look at, that form of violence, that's something that just comes to mind is conversations around, an intimate partner. Someone who's using violence against their partner is significantly more likely to harm a public official, significantly more likely to harm a police officer. And so it's just very complicated. And so my thoughts are, how do we get survivor feedback? How do we get an equitable, diverse group of survivors to weigh in on this and keep their voices at the center of however we're reimagining response? And I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to chime in for just a second and say that I am very excited that a lot of the agencies are speaking to each other, because when I went through a lot of it, as Diana said, I had to go to all these different places, tell my story over and over again. I felt like it was re-traumatizing. And to hear her say that a lot of things are being connected now, and to have survivors who have a voice, who can speak up and say, this is who I am and I'm willing to help other people or speak up. I love that. And I'm excited to see more of that in this community, just camaraderie amongst women to lift each other up and empower them and say, like, you are awesome and you can overcome. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Something that I'd like to name around gender-based violence against trans women and non-binary folk and trans people as a whole, and particularly with the intersection of young people, is I think there's this, there's a loss of a sense of agency around one's body and around one's physical expression, sexual expression. all of those things critical to a person's development. And so I think that's one particular impact of gender-based violence, and particularly towards, how to encourage community members to advocate for a world without violence. I think about transforming our justice systems. I think about, getting to a place where we actually don't have violence requires that our justice systems don't perpetuate more violence. And so there's really a lot of root work that needs to happen in order for us to attain a world without violence.
Would anyone else like to chime in on this question that is kind of at the root of our Week Without Violence? Has something that they'd like to share right now. Well, thank you all for participating in our panel. We do have one more thing, so don't go away. So thank you for being a part of this incredibly important panel. And for those of you watching locally and who want to be more involved, there is an opportunity with Buncombe County for your voice to be heard. The Attitudes Toward Violence Survey was developed through a partnership between the North Carolina Center for Health and Wellness, UNC Asheville, MAHEC, and nonprofit agencies, including Our Voice, Helpmate, and the Mountain Child Advocacy Center. The purpose of this project is to measure attitudes and perceptions about social norms, types of violence, and communities affected by violence in Buncombe County, North Carolina. The data that is collected annually from this survey informs targeted prevention, education, outreach, and advocacy activities. We're going to put the link in the chat for those of you who are interested in filling out this survey and getting your voice heard. That data influences where resources are allocated and is really important. So please, if you have time, fill out the survey. There is an English and a Spanish version that we are putting in the chat. I will give everyone time to be sure they see that, and that comes in. Okay, great. So go ahead and click on that link if you're interested in filling out that survey now. And thank you to everyone for joining this panel. And I really appreciate it. This recording will be on our YW website. And so you can refer people to it who are interested in a tour of these services in Asheville. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.